Hello and welcome to part 2 of my BIQU H2 extruder videos. In the first video, of course, I reviewed the extruder. You saw all of the test prints and I gave you some of my thoughts on the extruder. Now, I wanted to go ahead and give you all of the details about how I went about installing this extruder on my Ender 5 Plus here. Now I go through all of the details in this video. I cover the wiring, I cover the mechanical installation, I cover how I get the motor wiring from there down to here, anything you might need to know to install this extruder, or for those that are not installing the H2 extruder, extruders like this one. Because the process that I follow here would be pretty much the same no matter which extruder you were putting on here. Because what I do is I go through this installing connectors at the hot end so that you can pretty much exchange it for whatever extruder slash hot end combination you want here. Because once you've got connectors there, installing pretty much anything at that point is very easy. Now, of course, I gave you a full table of contents for this video down in the description, and of course, you'll see that on the bar down below. So if you know exactly what you're looking for, or if you come back to this video later as a reference guide, it'll be right there, easy for you to find. So while this video is pretty long, I hope you enjoy or learn from the detailed instructions that I give here. I'm not going to have an outro on this video, so look for my Patreon supporters in the middle of the video where I have a little bit of music, because those people make this possible. So thank you to all my Patreon supporters. And if you like this kind of content, go ahead and subscribe. But without further ado, let's get into the installation, and I hope you enjoy it. So to get things started off right, I've pulled out just about everything I could think of that I might need to do this upgrade. As with many of my other videos, I'm going to be walking through this process with you as I do it for the very first time. So you'll see the things that I think of off the bat and problems that I run into as I get going, so that you can kind of understand the process. So just real quick, I'll go over with you what I have here on the table, and then we'll get right to an unboxing of this still sealed H2 extruder. So first of all, on my right, you'll see that I have already done some test prints on my Ender 5 Plus before I've installed anything. As I've mentioned many times on this channel, you always need to do your benchmarks first. You always need to understand where your printer is before you perform an upgrade. So don't perform an upgrade until your printer is printing reasonably well, that you understand how well it's printing, and do a few test prints so that when you do your follow-up prints after your upgrade, you have something to compare it to so you know whether the upgrade was actually an upgrade. So I've got a Deadpool statue here, and I, of course, have a little benchy. I could have done some more, but this worked for my purposes of changing out an extruder. I also have both some heat shrink tubing to clean up my work and to keep things from shorting out, as well as some of these excellent, what do they call them? These solder seal wire connectors, solder heat seals. These are used a lot in automotive, in marine. These things are excellent, particularly if you're not a very good solderer. If you don't have a soldering iron, they come in, as you can see here, lots of different sizes, and these are really, really nice and convenient to do a quick seal with nothing but a heat source. I really like these for some of these type of connections, so I might use them in this video. Next up, I have an extender cable that you can buy from various sources. This is an extender cable for my extruder motors, and this is going to make this whole job a lot easier because at least on my Ender 5 Plus here, currently the motor is in the rear of the printer, and I'm going to have to extend that to go all the way to the extruder. So this cable already being set up for me is a real lifesaver. Now, obviously, things are color-coded really easily. If this is too long, you of course can cut it down, and I may end up doing that in this build. I then have some awesome JST XH connectors that are going to be used on any of the 2-pin connectors. I also have a whole box of these if I were to need it for 3-pin, 4-pin, or even more when running wires and putting connectors in place. Now those JST connectors are just fine for things like your fan and your thermistor, but for the heater cartridge, which pulls a lot more current, you're going to need something a little bit more heavy duty. So I have these 2-pin Molex connectors, which are rated at 6 amps each, which is more than enough for our purposes, but you definitely want something that's going to be able to handle the current of those connectors. I also, just in case I need it, I have some of this thermal wire, which all of this, of course, will be linked down in the description so you can find it for your own purposes. Now, beyond that, of course, I've got my H2 extruder here, fresh in the box. Now, for this one, so when I ordered mine, I ordered the all-metal heat brakes as well, which does not come standard with this. This way, I don't have to worry about printing at any temperature. I don't have to worry about the PTFE tubes that are in these normally, and it's just an easier printing experience for me. I've had 0 problems with the ones from Micro Swiss in the past, and I hope this will give me just as little of trouble. Now, tools. Obviously, I've got tools that I'm going to need for this job. So I've got a couple of different type of crimp tools. I have wire cutters of different types. I have some snips, of course. A good set of snips will be really nice when you're cutting some of these higher gauge wires. I have some nice needle nose pliers, which I may need for crimping or grabbing a wire, who knows. And of course, I'm going to need a decent soldering iron because you're not going to do this job without any soldering, I don't believe, unless you went with something like this. So I guess it's time to get to the unboxing. Let's take a look at what this comes with, what the whole assembly looks like, and then we'll get to the installation. One thing I forgot to mention in that last segment are the 3D printed parts we're going to need for this build. They were on my table there, but forgot to point them out to you. Now, both of these parts come from the 3D Print General. He did a terrific video on the H2, and I have borrowed these parts from him because his design works really well. Now, this is a big heavy-duty mounting plate that is going to convert the H2 to this back plate, hopefully on my Ender 5 Plus. He has also designed a cooling solution that's going to take the default fan that comes on the Ender 5 Plus and convert it for the H2. I think this will work really well as a default cooling solution. I'm going to test both of these out. Then as a more heavy duty high flow cooling solution, I now have this one here, which is designed by 3D_work over on Thingiverse. And you'll notice what this one does, it takes a 50-15 fan, which is one of those blower fans. It puts it right here and then gives you dual cooling from a single fan. I can't wait to try this out, see how well it works. You'll notice this mounts directly to our H2. It then adds the ability to mount your BL Touch directly to the front of this fan. You can see that mounts right there. So I think this is a really nice solution. I'm looking forward to comparing that default stock solution that the 3D Print General has provided to this more heavy-duty solution, which is going to be a much higher power blower than the one that comes with the printer itself. But I wanted to point these out to you. Of course, links in the description where you can find these, and we'll see how they work for me. Okay, so first things first, of course, comes the disassembly of our existing hot end. We'll need to pull all this apart. Then we're going to very selectively cut some wires off of here. I'll show you where we're going to cut them because, of course, we're replacing this whole thing with our new unit. We're going to start right here. So this one should be fairly straightforward once we find the right size screwdrivers. And let's get started. Now obviously I have the upgraded Micro Swiss hot end on mine, but this will still be the same even if you're still running the stock hot end. So what I'm doing right here is if your heating cartridge gets stuck in there, you may have to just do a little bit of pry to loosen that up, and then it should come right out. And of course, be very careful here. If you're not, then you will break your thermistor. Not that we're reusing this one, but you still don't want to break it in case you do want to reuse it. All right, so that should be everything off of the existing one. Now, of course, we're going to have to do some wire cutting in just a minute. While I'm doing that, though, I'm going to take a second to check to see if our mounting hardware is going to fit like we expect it to. And it does appear that everything lines up just like we would want. The mounting holes for the H2 are right here. I know those are going to fit because those are designed for that. And looks like we are, possibly going to need some longer screws here. But overall, I think it's going to be a good fit. All the holes are lining up. We got a screw here, and then of course a couple of screws right here. Or not if we just want to do these 2 screws. So next up, I guess, is probably the scariest part of the entire operation. That is figuring out what we want to do with our wiring, because we're about to have to cut some wires one way or another. And I thought long and hard about this because there are a lot of options here that you have with the wiring. You can run this to where we already have the connectors in the back of the printer. You could run them all the way to the board if you really wanted to. And from an electrical standpoint, there's definitely something to be said for having the least number of connectors on a wire. But I think ultimately, to make this as easy as possible while making it as functional as possible, what I've decided to do is put another set of connectors right here at this hot end. And of course, the main reason for that is these wires that it came with just aren't long enough for the Ender 5 Plus. Now, if you're doing this installation on an Ender 3, on an Ender 5, any sorts of smaller printers, then this isn't going to be as complicated because the wires it comes with will be plenty long enough for your purpose. But on the Ender 5 Plus here, that's not an option. So what I'm doing is I'm actually going to cut these off in this area, put new connectors here. And the main reason for that is quite often, or hopefully not too often, but occasionally, you have to replace these parts. You have to replace this hot end, you'll have to replace a fan, and so you're kind of going to be at that point have to cut something anyway or rerun an entire component, which is a huge pain. So if we instead put connectors at this point, then we have a quick connect system where all we'll have to do with the new component is throw a connector on it wherever it needs to be, and then we're ready to go, as opposed to running an entirely new wire. So this is what I've decided to do. If you want to run connectors back to where we have the connectors down here on the back, or if you want to run them all the way to the board, that's up to you. It's your electrical. Just do it safely. Make sure that the connectors are rated for the type of wire that you're running. Obviously, when you're talking about things like this, the heating cartridge, it's going to have a lot more wattage depending on what wattage heating cartridge you have. I think these are 40-watt cartridges. Make sure it can handle that. But for things like the fan and for the thermistor, those have relatively no current going through them, and so the rating on those is relatively unimportant. So I just wanted to share that with you. That's what we're doing here now. Now I can actually start the procedure. So first of all, I've got a couple of zip ties here that need to come off. I'll replace these later. I may even have to shorten this a little bit to put my connectors in place here. So let me cut those off. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this back. If it will cooperate. So let's go pull that back. All right, I'm going to go and cut this one off here as well, because we don't need that one while we're working on this. Now what I want to do is I'm going to pull this undersheathing back to wherever I think it needs to be. Now at this point, I'll probably go ahead and grab another small zip tie so that I'm not fighting with this the entire time. So I can just take it as far back as I want to pull it back. Again, I can cut this later. And just put a zip tie right here. And hopefully, if I put it on there tight enough, it will hold that back some so that I don't have to worry about it. I'll just leave that there just to notice where I'm working. Now, I definitely don't want to lose any length here because this is the proper length to actually go to our extents on here. So what I really want to do is just make sure I preserve as much of this wire as possible. If I add a little extra wire, no big deal. I can pull that back down and, you know, stow it at the other end, because that would be pretty easy. But at this point, I want to kind of cut these as close as possible. Now make sure, don't cut this one. This is for your BL Touch. We don't need to redo this one. Notice it already has a connector on the end. If you cut this, you're going to be a very sad person. So make sure you keep that out of the way while you're doing your cutting. And then from there on out, we will go ahead and start cutting these off. Now, if you have any reason that you want to save these because, hey, I may need them again, I'll put connectors on them, then make sure you give yourself just a little bit of room to put connectors on them. So again, I'm dealing with what, probably 3 inches here or so, maybe 2.5 inches. I'm going to go ahead and cut that off there. And that's done. No turning back at this point. Again, don't cut that wire. All right, next up, I am going to cut the other 2 wires. Now these are our fan wires. I'm going to do kind of the same distance because obviously that's where the connectors want to be. But there is actually a consideration here for how is this going to sheathe. And if I put all of my connectors in the same spot, that's going to make the sheathing difficult to go over them. So I'm actually going to, if I'm going to put connectors on these wires here, what I'm going to try to do is actually cut these a little bit lower, I believe, just to give a little bit more room for connectors. I think that'll be a little bit better. Now I don't want to do a lot of room, but I think if I do right there, that'll be pretty good. Now it's important to note, now I just cut 2 wires, red and black is my cooling fan that goes to my hot end. The blue and yellow is the cooling fan that goes to my part cooling. That's obviously going to come in handy later to keep that in mind. Oh, now that it's already done, it's important to go ahead and bring this up. Technically, I did not have to cut the cooling fan for the part cooling's wire. I could have just left that as is, not cut that wire, and if I would have done that, then it would have saved me 1 connector, but it doesn't give me any options for the future because then I can't replace this fan if I'd like to, like I said, like I'm going to do with the 5015 to try out other cooling solutions. So if you don't want to, if you plan on using this fan no matter what, don't worry about cutting that wire, but there we go. Now for my first crimp and connector on all of these, I'm actually going to do the thickest of them. I'm a little worried about this one because it's going to be a little bit harder to do, I believe. But that is, of course, for the heater cartridge. That's these 2 red wires. Now, this is one of the little connectors I'm going to need. I'm going to put the female end of the connector here. It's personal preference, whichever one you want to do. But I usually like the receiving end here on the part of the printer. So again, I'm going to need to put these on here. This kind of filling this in here kind of lets me know how far I need to go with that strip there. And keep in mind, if you're not used to doing one of these connectors or one of these crimps, the first crimp here, this has 2 crimps on it, the first crimp is for the wire. The back crimp here is for the sheathing and it holds it all together. So you need both crimps, and as you can see, that only means I need a couple of millimeters of that sheathing removed in order to put these on properly. So keep that in mind when you're actually pulling off the insulation on these. So I've got this here. I'm not exactly sure what the gauge of the actual wire is in here, so I'm going to be very careful when I do this. And I'm going to start with some of my highest gauge. This goes up to 18 gauge. I'm going to try that first, see if that works. That seems to have worked pretty well, although given the type of insulation on the outside of this, that left some of the little strands on here, so I'm just going to need to cut those off. That looks about right. Some of that can stick into the connector itself. I'm going to do the same thing on the other one. So that is 18 gauge. I don't know if that's the actual gauge of the wire, but it sure is close enough for what I'm doing. Came off pretty good on that one too, even a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and clean that up. There again. All right. So those look really good. Now I have to admit, this is the part of any job I don't I'm not ever looking forward to this part of a job. I don't like crimping. Even with the best crimpers I have, I still make mistakes. So just letting you know, we all have a problem with this part of the job, or at least I still do. So if I don't get the best angle here, my apologies, but I'm way more worried about getting this crimp done properly than I am getting the best camera angle, because I don't have a whole lot of extra of these connectors. So if I screw this up too much, then I'm going to be in a big problem. So I'm not exactly sure what size I need here. I can always go tighter on the crimp, but you can't go looser. I do like to crimp the wire portion first. I don't know if that's the proper way, but let me go ahead and squeeze this down just a little bit. Squeeze this one in just a little bit. That'll help hold it on for me a little. And let's go ahead and start with the 2mm. Yeah, which is the next to last one. See if that gives it a good crimp. Hoping for the best, expecting the worst. That actually, I think, looks pretty good. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. Holds on real well. Then for the outside crimp, I think I'm going to go to the 2.3mm. See if that works. Again, I can always go tighter if I need to. Can't go looser. See if that works. That outside one never works well for me. So if you're watching and you know a better technique on this, please let me know. I'm always up for new tips on things I don't like doing. So notice on this one, for whatever reason, I got one side of it. I didn't get the other side. Now, this one looks good enough. I'm going to take it down to the 2 crimp, tighten that up a little bit. Maybe I should have gone with the 2 crimp on that as well. But I think between the wire crimp and that crimp, I think that's going to hold. That seems to be good. I'm not going to pull on it a lot. But let's go ahead and do the other one. Okay, we're going to do the 2 on both of these, if that works well. Okay, there's the 2 on the inner one. That one looks as good as the first one, so that's fantastic. And let's just do the 2 on this one this time as well, see if that gives us a better result. And that may have been what I should have done the first time. Let's see. So that's still not fantastic. Crimp didn't go in exactly the way I want to. Let me go a little tighter. Oh, sticking together. Something is wrong on that one. So I don't know what's going on there. I'm going to have to do this manually. And now this ugly sheathing is now making a mess. I may have salvaged it here. Looks like I may have saved it. It's a little thin there, but some careful work. I think that one is at least as strong as the first one. Let's go ahead and get our connector on. So this is the female side of the connector, which looks like that. Now this is a little confusing because it's kind of both female and male on these, which is kind of weird because the connector, this one becomes a female in terms of the plastic, but this one is the male in terms of the pins. So I guess that is what it is. So let's go ahead and put these in here. Hopefully everything fits, including my crimp. That one went in absolutely perfect. So this one goes in as well, because the crimp has to actually fit in there too. Kind of lets you know if you did it right, and it looks like I may have gotten either lucky or I've upped my achievement level on these. So that one looks really good. Now I'm going to pull that one off to the side. Obviously, we don't need to do anything to the BL Touch. Now for the other three connectors here, again, I am using these lower current JST connectors, and again, the female, male, again, it's kind of difficult to tell which is which. The pin side, which I think is the male end on. It was about that time that I lost audio recording, so I'm going to narrate some of this here as we get back to my real audio. So right here I'm showing that you can use two types of soldering. You can either solder directly to the connector, or you can use these solder seals and use one of these pre-soldered connectors and just solder the wires, which is a little bit easier. Now here for the next several minutes, I am simply going to be connecting the wires up to the connectors. I've got three sets of wires here. I've got two fans and I have the connector for the thermistor, and so that's all going to go together right here. I will leave you with some nice music unless I need to come in and actually comment a little bit more, but I think this section's pretty self-explanatory. Right here, it's pretty nice. If you want to solder one of these connectors and don't want to burn your fingers off, it's really nice to be able to actually attach it to an existing wire that has the other end of the connector on it. Then you can solder to the back of the connector without worrying about actually burning yourself. Make sure when you're soldering, make sure you tin both ends of whatever you're soldering together. So tin the connector, tin the wires. That'll save you a lot of headache when it comes time to actually try to connect these together, because some of your work is actually done before you even get started with the actual connection. Make sure you always put on your heat shrink first, and then when you're done, you can simply slide it back down over your connector. If you forget to put on your heat shrink before you get started, that's where you run into the problem and you end up having to unsolder it, put your heat shrink back on, and then start over. Now, for all of you that are not confident with your soldering, and let's be honest, there are very few of us that are, keep in mind that I've cut a lot of video of here with me actually struggling through these connections, because obviously that's not very much fun to watch. So even those of us that have had actually some experience soldering these connectors, they're still a pain. They still take a little bit more time than expected. You just have to be patient, work on having a steady hand, and you'll get through it. All right, let's pull these down, see if they fit. Maybe I can get it on there. Yep. All right, so that side's on too. I can pull this off. All right, so now let's take care of the heat shrink. So obviously I have a nice torch here. Proper tip on the end of it, as you can see right there, I hope. There you go, proper tip on the end. Crank this up. Okay. Be careful not to overheat anything. This nozzle on here gives me a lot of control over that heat to make sure I don't overdo it. Of course, it gets hotter the longer I let it run, so I have to take that into account. But I don't want to melt my connectors or anything like that. It takes very little to get it done. Don't put your fingers in front of it. Alright, that's it. Turn it off. Okay, so the receiving end of all of this is done. As you can see, everything nice and heat shrinked. I think this will last a good long time, as long as those hold. And so the only thing we have left to do now, of course, is make the actual devices connect to these as they should. First thing I'm going to do is the thermistor. It's a good, easy example. If you'll notice, this was a very long wire, and I have cut off all the wire in between because I actually want to reuse this, because I would actually rather solder this wire together than to have to crimp another connector, just because of how difficult I find that particular task to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and use those other connectors I've told you about, which are these type, which should make this a pretty easy task even if you're not good at soldering. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to grab, these are probably in the 22 range. Now I am going to need probably some sort of helping hands for these. Don't know if I'll be able to do it without it. So that goes in there. Then I can actually line up, I don't think it matters. Again, polarity on this one doesn't matter. But line up those two. Now if you'll notice in here, let me show you how these work. There are two binding, I'm guessing sort of, these are probably some sort of glue or something in the ends here. And then the center has a little solder bulb that melts onto the wire. And so if we put this in here, make sure the solder bulb is over the wire. And then we're going to melt that with the other one going into that solder bulb. And then if they're both there, when we melt this and melt that little piece of metal, I keep calling it the solder bulb, the wire will be in one piece. Let me grab a helping hands of some sort to hold this while I heat it up. Alright, so I have it all rigged up here. I'm going to use my torch again to get this thing melted. I'm just going to apply even heat. Not get too close to it. This one's pretty hot. I also have a heat gun that I could do this with, or I could do it with a lighter if I didn't have any other solutions. But you'll see it when those little bulbs start to melt. Alright, then when that's done, you actually have done two steps in one. So at this point I've soldered the wires on the inside with that solder bead, and I've also heat shrinked it, and the entire connection is already done. Again, a great solution if you particularly don't enjoy crimping like I don't, or you're just looking to reuse these ends which you already have on your wire. So this is probably ends up saving you some money, because you can buy these 26 to 24 gauge connectors on here pretty cheap in big multi-packs. Again, links in the description if you're looking for where to find these. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the rest of these. So I've got my two fans that I still need to do, and I also still need to crimp the end of the heating cartridge. So let's go ahead and get those done. Alright, next up is mechanical. So it's time to attach the printed plate, which I've just printed in some nice PLA for now. But it turns out I need it in something tougher, ABS, PETG, I'll reprint it. But I think this will work, unless this gets too hot, and then I'll worry about it then. But right now we need to mount these two holes right here onto these two holes of our extruder. So first of all, most of the time when you print something that has very tight tolerances, you'll find that your screws aren't going to fit. Now these are M3 screws, so I went ahead and got my M3 drill bit, and we will go ahead and do it over something, and we'll go ahead and drill these out just a little bit, real slowly. We don't want to damage the print. So get through it, and then clean it up. And then we're going to do the bottom one. And when I first started 3D printing, I didn't really like doing this because, you know, get the print right, and then you won't have to do this. But come to find out, this is just fine. Saves you a lot of plastic, and we don't want any more of this going to the waste bin than we have to. So, got this right here. Again, screws go in on this side because, as you can see, these are sunk into the part so they won't get in the way. Now we can take it, and obviously this is the front because it has the wheel on it, and then like that right there. So we're going to attach it to here first. I think these are going to take some M3/8 screws. This should fit in here with the M3 I drilled out. Let's just go ahead and check on that by itself. May need my screwdriver to get it in there well. And hopefully these are the right size. These are my, I think they're called button head screws. If these don't work though, I may have to get the socket head ones and hope I have the right size in the socket head. Now it's looking like that's not going in super smooth, so I may need to drill it out one more time. That is not going to fit, so let me see if I can go find the socket head screws real quick, and we'll go from there. So I was unable to find the 3mm socket head screws that I wanted to use, so I just drilled these out to 6mm so that they would fit the standard button head screws that I do have. So this should work just fine to mount this. This goes on the bottom, and you'll find that it goes like this. Yep, just like that. So now we go back over here. This is the back, this is the front, and it should go on like this, just like that. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to stick our top one in. And I drilled these out to 3mm exactly. That should be just fine for this. And now we can tighten these down in here. Okay, again, these are 8mm screws. Let me grab my other one. Goes down in here too. Those are tightened down all the way, and that's good and tight. So now we can flip this around. Now, to give this a little bit more wiggle room, I went ahead and drilled these out to 3.2mm so that I could make sure that I'd be able to line those up just right, give them a little bit more room. So I think these are going to be M312s that I'm going to use here to attach it to the back plate. We'll get this top one going, and then I'll grab that M312 for the bottom, and that's going to go in right here. Now this one I'm going to have to, I think, wiggle around a little bit to figure out where it goes. Again, that's why I gave the hole a little bit more room, and that does help me get this aligned. Make sure you don't force any of this. If you obviously damage any of your back plating, you're going to have a real problem because you're not going to be able to rethread that easily. I'm noticing this one's not going quite flush, so I may need to drill that out a bit more as well because it's a little off-centered, it appears. It is tight, which means I'm probably running against the side of that hole. Just a little bit off on the dimensions. So I'll grab my 6mm drill bit again, See if I can drill that out very, very carefully. Otherwise, you're going to go too far and damage the part and have to reprint it. So I'm going to come in here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it with this drill bit. I'm going to try pushing against the side here. It's just plastic, so it usually works pretty well. Again, I'm just applying a little pressure to my right so that it goes in there a little bit easier. Be very gentle. All right. I'm going to see if that goes in again. Try this again. That's probably enough. It doesn't need much. It's probably only a fraction of a millimeter off. But I would like it to be as flush as possible because that means that it's making good contact. Yeah, that's a lot better. It's going in there. I'm going to go ahead and grab my hex key, and that will help me tighten this up because I don't want any wiggle on my mounting, obviously, because that will affect the prints. This is the hex key that came with the extruder. It is M3, just my nuts, my screws here aren't quite taking it as well as I would like. But that's pretty flush there. And then I'll tighten this one down. Again, don't over tighten these. It's looking like I'm applying more torque than I would like to, simply because, yeah, it's funny, these aren't very compliant, it appears, because my other driver is fitting that a lot better than that one is. So I guess I'll go back to that and do the best I can. Tighten that down. There we go, it did go in there. That's good and flush. That one's good and flush. All right, so that's nice and sturdy here. Next up, let's look at some of the wiring. First of all, I'd like to see what I'm going to do with this BL Touch. Little concerned about that the most because really don't see a way to mount this. Well, I guess it's possible, and actually pretty good fit. If I actually start over here and pull these out, remount it with some longer M3 screws, now that I've gone through all of that. This M3 screw is a 16 and it's going to be long enough, so through the magic of video I'm going to do that real quick, mount it here and see how sturdy that is, just mounting it straight through. Go ahead and pull off the BL Touch itself because it's kind of in the way. Alright, so this goes here, finger guard goes on this side. I have to decide what's best for my wiring. I would love for it to come out here, which is closer to the back, if I can get all the screws in that side. So let's give that a shot. Alright, so screws on this side. Airflow usually goes this way to where the fan is on the outside and the back is on that side there. See if this will fit in here. I think it will. That side went on easily, but will it actually angle up and let me get access to the other one? That's a big if. And I don't know if it will. Well, yeah, it did. So that one actually did fit in there. It's seems to be a little lopsided, so if we decide to move the BL Touch at a later time, that will be fine. Also, moving the BL Touch at a later time will free up this fan, provide better airflow. All right, now we can put our BL Touch back on. Hopefully, we'll probably end up having to put it back off in a minute in order to put its wiring back on, but I don't want to misplace everything while we're doing this. I'm going to go ahead and put it back in. Okay, that's back on there for now. All right, so next up, let's go ahead and wire up the extruder itself. Get a little bit closer here so you can see what I'm doing. And we're going to need to pull off the sock temporarily. And I think the first thing I need to do, or the first thing I'd like to do, is actually turn this 90 degrees so that in typical fashion they'll be coming in here on the side, and then I can route them at least partially behind this area here. If they come out the front, they're going to be in the way of the fan and stuff like that. So let's see if it's a big deal to turn this 90 degrees by loosening this up, turning it 90 degrees. I want to put the thermistor in the front, and I'm going to put the heating cartridge in the back. And the reason for that is the thermistor wiring is a bit more forgiving, so I'm going to turn it this way. Tighten it back up. Yep, that was no problem at all. Now I can come in here with those new wires I created before. I'm going to insert those. Now in the little bag that came with the kit, you will find two tiny little grub screws, those two little black things. That's what we're going to need to secure these. Now, I'm going to tell you this now, and I'm probably going to jinx myself horribly, but you don't want to lose those two tiny little grub screws because you're not going to get more, or you'd have to go find your own, and that wouldn't be any fun. So, tiny little grub screws, and there is going to be the needed Allen wrench in the bag that came with it. So that's going to be the smallest one of these, I believe. And then that will fit there just like that. And there's a little hole in the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and get these started. There's one on the back side. All right, quick new change of angle. And I'm going to put in these grub screws. I'm going to go ahead and prime them so I'm not trying to hold everything at once. This will hopefully help me from losing them. So I'm just going to get that started there. I'm going to grab the other one, which I put in my magnetic tray. And then I'm going to put the other one in, which goes in the front. I'm just going to make sure it's on here well so that I don't lose it. It does snap on pretty well while you're doing it. So I'm going to just get that started again. All right, so let's put on the big one first. I'm going to put that here, and I'm actually going to play with the angle a little bit to see what's the best way to route this around the back here, or if I need to, just around the side. And I think a little bit at an angle will give me the most flexibility. So kind of angled there, and then I'm just going to tighten that up. Making sure that, honestly, I don't want it to stick out either side too far. If it's kind of centered, that's what I'm going for. So tighten that down, and then that shouldn't move anymore. Be careful with this, of course. This is actually a very tight connection on this side, and if you wobble it too much, you can actually break that pretty easily. Now I'm going to take this one and stick that in, I guess, all the way, and it kind of holds itself, to be honest. And then I'm going to tighten that one down too. Don't over tighten this one. Please keep in mind this is just a sheathing with probably a glass bead or something like that underneath, and we don't want to crush it. So just tight enough where that's not going to come loose on you. That will come out. And then we can go and put our sock back on so that we don't have to worry about it later. And there we go. Looks really nice. It's way more square than it looks in this picture, but that looks pretty good. Then both of these come around the side here. So back up top. All right, so at this point, one of the last wires I have to run is this one right here, and it is the stepper motor wire. And one of the things I really wanted to do was to be able to actually just run this stepper motor basically from where it was before and just create an extension cable that went from here to here. Now, obviously I could make my own extension cable if I really wanted to, but I am trying to give you guys links to parts that you can use. So I have this extension cable, which I bought a while back off of one of the Asian websites, and unfortunately, this is a 4-pin to 4-pin extension cable, which means I can't put it on the end of the extension cable. I actually have to put it on the other end, which actually goes from the main board to down here. So that seems to be what I'm going to have to do if I want to use this part, which is really what I want to do. This is just a nice, simple, straight through cable. That would then allow me to move this black cable that it came with, basically where all the other cables are, put that adapter there, and then hopefully that will actually just run back through this bundle of cables that's already going to the hot end. That would be really ideal, and hopefully that's what I can do. That's what I'm going to go for here. So now you know the plan. I'm going to run the extension cable from the main board to the back of this chassis somewhere in this area down here that you're familiar with. If you already have an Ender 5 Plus, it's where all the other cable adapters are. And then I'm going to run the original cable, which is a 4 to 6 pin wire, from that area up through the cable loom to the hot end. Then I'll be ready to go. I'm just going to do a wide shot here as I do all of that. Save us a little bit of time. I'll see you back in just a minute. Okay, so now that all of the wiring is in place, let's go and finish up in this area and see if everything reaches like it should, and then we'll move to the back because we still have to find a way to run our filament from our filament sensor, if you're going to continue to use it, to the actual hot end here. So let's go ahead and do this. First of all, we have our motor wire, which is going to go right there on top because that's where I moved it to. We have the hot end wire, which it looks like I may not have made quite long enough. So that's fantastic. All right, well, just long enough, let's put it that way. All right, this is going to be our thermistor. Thermistor is the two white wires. Run that up here. All right. We have our BL Touch, which I will probably have to pull off to get down here. Maybe, maybe not. Let's find out. If I've got to take it off, I will. If I don't, I won't. I'll take it off just to be on the safe side. Let's go and do our fans. So this is going to be the hot end fan, which is the black and red one. All right, so as you can see here, of course I need to run this one, so let me go ahead, grab the right screwdriver and get that done. All right, that goes right back in here. It should only go in there one way, because of the keys. I think that's the way it goes, yep. All right, put that back on. There we go. That one's in there. And as you can see, we have one wire that is still unaccounted for. And of course, that is our part cooling fan, which we prepared earlier. Now, this is the part that 3D Print General came up with. It does the job. So this is what we're going to start out with because at least it allows us to test cooling. It's not my favorite design because it does cover up this wheel, which is for advancing the filament. So I don't think this is what I'll go with long term one way or the other, but let's go ahead and give that a shot. Now I think I am going to have to drill these out because these are M3s, and from what I can tell there's no way those M3s are going to fit in there. No, not even close. Whether that's the original model or just tolerances when I printed this, it's hard to say. So I'm going to go ahead and drill those out and we'll get this mounted on here. All right, holes drilled out. I'm going to be using 12mm panhead screws and hopefully those will fit. Let's go ahead before we actually attach this and see if that will fit with the fan in place or if that's not going to fit. Yes, he did leave enough room back there for those screws, so that's nice. Let's go ahead and get those attached. Little worried that these also were built for the socket head screws because now this little screw hole right here doesn't quite line up the way I'd want it to. It's not a huge deal because if one of them's not there, it should still work. But I do like where that cooling comes in down here. I think that's a good place for that. So now we'll just put this on here. I think I'm going to need some longer screws than the ones it came with. Let me take a look real quick. Let me pull out the original ones. All right, so here are the original ones. And we'll see if they still fit. Actually, they may still fit. These are the ones that were on the original hot end. Yep, and those are going in. Those are threading well. Just like before, I'm taking the small ones and putting them on the top. We'll see if this one still fits over here or if that one's just going to have to stay out for now. Can I finagle it? Not really. So I'm going to leave that one off for now. It's not a big deal. In the long run, I would have to get those other screws in here. So these are the longer ones, and hopefully they find their threaded holes down here. See if it can find that hole over there. It's actually not quite lining up the way I'd want it to, but we're going to see if I can get it in there. Not sure if that's in there. Let's see. Let's tighten it up a little bit. I know this top left one is going in well. Bottom one down here, I can't tell. Oh, maybe I got it that time. No, I'm out of focus here, sorry. All right, that one's in. All right, I got that one in too. There we go. All of them, but this one are in now, which plenty sturdy for what we're doing. All right, so the last one, of course, this one is our original blue and yellow, and that is going to go in right here. Double checking and see. Yep, I think that's wired correctly. Looks like I still have yellow, which is red, and then right here yellow, which is red. So I think all of that works well. So one thing I'm definitely going to have to change with a future print, guess I'm going to have to make my own here because there's nothing up here to hold this. This print back here, the one that's holding on everything, I would love some zip tie mounts. So I think I'm going to have to make those changes. I may, of course, line up the holes a little bit more accurately for this particular back plate. But as you can see, I would love something really sturdy, maybe even this way to get it at a good angle. Because as it is right now, it's going to be kind of flopping around, which is less than ideal. So, thought about it a little bit, and the way I'm going to handle this on mine, again, if you decide that you don't want to keep the filament runout sensor, or if you plan on putting it somewhere else. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that Bowden tube for the purpose of getting it to our hot end, and I'm really happy because BIQU Big Tree Tech thought about that, and they made it where we can attach our hose adapter here. Just need a pair of pliers to tighten that up a little bit because I don't want it coming off during the print. So this is just a standard hose adapter that I have, and then we are still good to go. So that's really nice. Now the filament path is still good. The only real downside I can think of to this off the top of my head is obviously we still end up with about this much wasted filament because our filament runout sensor is here in the back, but we do still get to use it, and at least in the short term I can actually go ahead and use this to hold up my wiring loom, which is pretty nice. And since it's, you know, not doing anything but just carrying the filament here, it should be good and sturdy and provide a little bit. Let me make sure, after I get all this in here, I'm obviously going to clean up these wires with some zip ties, make sure nothing is in the way of my fans. And let's see, does this go here? It does make it all the way to that front corner, just as I'd expect, and obviously if it makes it there, it's not going to have a problem going anywhere else. And I'm pretty happy here because, at least on initial inspection, it looks like it still hits all of the points on my bed. I mean, it's probably going to be a little bit more forward, and I'll find this out when I get to testing, but I'm really happy with the motion here. So I'm going to snap my fingers here and we will get all my wiring done. Alright, definitely a decent enough job for initial testing, and as you can see, all of these are over here. Hopefully I don't have any interference problems with putting the high current over here with our motor, but I think that'll be okay. Fan, BL touch, that one's another one I have to watch out for interference on, and the other fan. At this point, let's go to the back, which, well, you can almost see it back there. Anyway, we're going to go ahead back here to the back and just tidy up a bit so that I can run filament without any problems. Okay, so back here we obviously have our old stepper motor, which at this point we're not going to need, so we can remove that. Like I said, I'm going to leave my filament sensor here, actually use that. There won't be any changes in firmware, anything that's needed, because I'm just going to keep using it. Ideally what we're going to do here is replace this with a printed part that all it's going to do is hold this whole hose barb. But what I'm going to try to do temporarily, and by the end of the video remedy it, is just save this so it will attach to this just while I'm running my tests. Keep in mind, when you're doing a mod like this, it's important to realize you don't have to have everything at the very beginning. You can get everything, you can get it tested, then you can make it polished. That's what I'm doing in this video. So what I'm going to do first is find the necessary size screwdriver to get these off. Make sure I'm holding on to this very well. I don't want to lose the spring or anything, and that's all that's holding on the arm. Alright, loosens up that tension. Pull that off, don't lose that either. Okay, now as I am pulling off the motor here, what's the right size? Now as I'm pulling off the motor here, I'm going to need an actual, nope, that comes off. I'm going to need to hold the motor, otherwise everything is going to fall apart as I remove the last screws, and obviously I don't want to drop the stepper motor. Alright, as I mentioned, my initial goal here is simply to save this piece, use it to get my filament from point A to point B. So what I'm going to do here is just get some M3 nuts from one of my kits. Should only need 2 for the top 2 screws. Those are the ones that are really going to matter to me. So I'm going to grab this, put this right back where it came from, I'm going to put an M3 nut on the back of it and just reassemble it in place. Okay, one more M3 nut and the original screw that was on here. Tighten it down, tighten it down. If I want to tidy this up, I can go and remove this screw right here. As you can see here, there's technically no reason not to just keep using this. It doesn't look that bad. My 3D printed part's going to be extremely similar to this, so the only reason to reprint it, to put something else here, is just for aesthetic reasons. If you want to put something nicer here, if you want to 3D print something. But given that this is molded plastic, it's probably going to hold the end of this hose actually pretty secure. And as I can show you right here, let me get my filament. All right, now we're going to just thread this up like we normally would. Put it up through here and up through this hole. Now that will go straight to our hot end, just as before. Now, if my calculations are correct, I think we're just about ready to start with the actual setup of this. Make sure that everything works over on the hot end side, get everything turned on, and then we've got a lot of maintenance to do to get ready to actually use this. So let's head back up to the front. All right, as I was about to set everything up to get everything turned on, I noticed that my nozzle is actually not below my cooling solution. It is really close, but close is definitely not, enough when dealing with this, because obviously if this scrapes the bed before the nozzle ever reaches it, that's not going to work at all. So I think I'm going to end up having to lower my nozzle here. Now that's reasonably involved, because what I'm going to have to do is actually pull both of these out, move the whole thing down by twisting the heat block, and then tightening my nozzle back down. But I really don't have a choice, because this doesn't have any vertical adjustment. So that's another good mod that could be done to this, would be add some vertical adjustment to it. So I'm going to go ahead and make that mod here. I did want to point it out because I think this is really important at this point, that if you're not careful, you may end up scraping this on the bed before your nozzle hits it. So let me go and take care of that. So I just realized a flaw in my plan, and no matter how much I move the heat block down, it's not going to change the total length of this area, because we're always putting the nozzle up against our heat break. So that's not going to help at all. So that means that I either have to abandon this cooler altogether, because there's no flexibility here and it's just wrong, or I'm going to have to actually drill these out a little bit so that I have just a little flexibility, because it's kind of at the nozzle for me. So I'm going to try to do that, try to salvage this line of thought before I have to switch over to the other one I was going to try. So let's give that a shot real quick. Another thing I realized while I was assembling this was that since this doesn't move, and at least since mine's printed out of PLA, and honestly you don't want anything melting near your hot end, is this heat block is going to have to come up a little bit more maybe than you think. Otherwise you're going to be sitting right on top of this cooler, which will definitely melt it. So make sure you've got that up a little bit higher than maybe you think you should. All right, I think I've just got it figured out. Now this is going to be really close, so we're going to have to see when we get everything set up and moving if it's scraping, but I think it's just close enough. All right, so now's the moment of truth. As you can see, I have everything wired up here. We're going to turn on the printer down here and actually see if everything works properly. Then we'll be able to start the leveling process and everything like that. So let's cut it on. All right, BL Touch is working. That's a good sign. And there is a fan test. Both fans came on, as you can see, so that's a good sign for our fans. Now what we need to do is go ahead, we're just going to double check a few things. First of all, if you'll notice on the screen here, Both of our temperature sensors are working. This one's a little bit higher. It's probably because I've been messing with it, but both of those look good. Let's go ahead and test the fans. So I'm going to go into temperature, fan speed. This should cut on the part cooling fan, and it does, so that's a great sign. Next up, this fan's not on right now, which is the hot end fan, so let's test that out. I must have on the ability for that to turn on with heat, so let's try that. I'm going to heat up the nozzle. Let's go ahead and heat it up to, I don't know, we don't need to heat it up all the way, but for the heck of it, let's go ahead. We'll heat it up all the way, and this will also allow us to test our thermistor and our heating cartridge, make sure all that works properly. So we're going to do, let's just do 200 and hit go. And while that starts heating up, now let's see, yep, that's heating up. So we are seeing that the nozzle is heating up, which is terrific. That means that that is wired correctly, both the thermistor and the heating cartridge. Now let's see when we get to a certain temperature, does that fan cut on? Because as of right now, that fan is still off, and I don't know why. Because we did see it spin up on boot, but as of right now, it is still not spinning. I'm not exactly sure what the reason is. So sticking something in it is not making it move. I don't know why that's acting like it is not powered on, because we did see it spin up on power up, so there was a test done on it and it did work. So since we don't want to heat up past a point where we're actually going to damage anything, because it's definitely not going to be able to cool itself off, I'm going to go ahead and stop that temperature and do a cool down on it. And then we need to figure out, because that obviously that part cooling fan was working before, so I'm going to need to do some debugging, try with a different fan, see if that's going to be a problem. So obviously what we need to do also is test the motor. So we're going to have to pull out our instructions here, do a little bit of reconfiguring in the menu system here. We're going to go to the advanced settings. And first things first, I want to check the voltage on that TMC driver. We're going to go to driver current. And for E1, we want 800. That's absolutely what they told us to set it to, so we are good there, nothing to change. And the steps per millimeter is really going to have to change on that E. Hopefully this doesn't take too long to zoom through, but the new one that they recommend and what we're going to just run a couple of tests with is 932 steps. Good, they've got this to where it goes faster as you go faster. So let's go for 932 just as our starting steps. 932. All right. Go ahead and do a save just in case we have to power it down. We won't have to reset this. There we go. Now we need to actually take care of that fan. So let me go ahead. I am going to heat back up this nozzle at this time just to test our motor, so I'll know what I need to actually debug. So we'll just take that back to 200 because it's not going to extrude if that's not heated up. So we will go ahead and run that up to 200. While that runs up to 200, I'm going to go back here, feed this into our hot end. All right, it does feel like we're all the way to the hot end. And then I'm going to pull on my release, which should allow us to push it into the hot end, at least I hope. I feel like going there. Maybe we just need to go right up to the edge there, and then we'll see if it turns. So we are hot enough. Should be able to go to motion. Move axis. Extruder. Let's take some baby steps here, make sure it's working. All right, I've got my hand on it. I do feel that it's running. Let me grab the filament, see if that, yes, it has caught the filament. And it does feel like it's running at about the right speed. Now, you're not going to be able to see this as soon as it comes out, but hopefully if I keep moving this forward, we will see some filament drop out here in a minute. And there we go. It is extruding. So, motor's running, and even better, one thing I was concerned about was the motor going to run in the proper direction. No problem there at all. The motor is running in the proper direction. Heater cartridge works, thermistor works, the part cooling fan works. It seems like the only thing I'm having a problem with is this fan over here. Actually, it looks like that fan is running now. Yep, that fan's running now. I don't know what's going on with that fan, why it's cutting on sometimes and not others. Maybe I have a short in here, I'm not sure. I'm going to do a little bit of debugging off camera to figure that out, but at least it is running now. Let me take a look, see if our temperatures are holding, because most likely, no, actually the temperatures are holding really well. I thought we were going to have to do a PID tune there, and I probably will do a PID tune just to make sure that I'm happy with that. Looks like we're good to go, other than a little bit of debugging there to figure out why that was cutting off on me. So I think I'm going to go back to a wide shot here. Time to do the mechanical part of actually leveling the bed properly. So let me back up, start the bed leveling process, and we'll take a look at how it prints in just a minute. Now, for the record here, I am running a SKR Mini E3 version 2.0, so I do not have a G34. So we're going to just have to do the left-right leveling manually. All right, we're going to do an auto home here, make sure everything works properly. Up. Well, we have gotten in the way of our end stop, it seems, but that's an easy fix. Actually, the end stop right here actually just has a screw right here, and we can just move it sideways so that it hits correctly. So that's what I'm going to do right here. I'm going to go unplug that. That's as far over as we can go, but it hits the wheel, and so we're just going to move it over into the wheel because we've moved just a little bit over. We'll hook that back up. There wasn't actually much change at all. All right, let's do this again. All right, everything's heating up now. Now let's do that auto home. I'm also going to see, yeah, the fan's cutting on again this time. Still don't know if I just have a short here or something like that. That's what it looks like. I can't get it to actually start. Anyway, motion, auto home. All right, we're good now. All right, now I haven't set my new offset for the BL Touch. So that is one thing I'm going to have to do. BL Touch offset looks like it is about 43. And it looks like maybe 43 and maybe 2 or 3 behind it. So we can get that set up. It's pretty close though, not a big problem. Looks really good. I like that. Okay, let's change that offset. Now if you're looking for that offset, it's under Configuration, Advanced, Probe Offsets. So technically it is. We're going to go negative 43. And the Y offset is going to be negative 3. All right. Again, I'm going to go down here to the bottom of my settings. Make sure I store every time I do one of these. Now the first thing we're going to need to do is actually level the bed left to right.